It's great to be here in Queensland. I actually grew up just down the road in Toowoomba, so it's great to be back here and discussing this report on inequality. These reports obviously benefit a lot from external contributions, and I do in particular want to thank Simon Longstaff for his contribution, and also Nicholas Rohde from Griffith University, who helped us out on the measurement issues. Much appreciated. So since the global financial crisis, the debate on inequality has certainly intensified, and in 2017 it became a major focus of political debate here in Australia. CEDA's concern about inequality really rests on three issues. The first is that it drives a wedge between those who are seen to be benefiting from economic growth and those who are not, undermining social cohesion. The second is that high and increasing inequality can contribute to adverse societal outcomes, like increased crime and political instability. And finally, significant inequality in income and employment outcomes can weigh on capital formation, skills formation and productivity. So the focus on the key issue at hand, which was a big part of Simon's talk, was inequality of opportunity. And it's often lost in the debate on inequality. We know that for a productive, competitive economy, there will be some level of inequality. But the real question is, have we done enough to ensure equality of opportunity? And the answer to that is in some areas, no. And we also have new emerging risks. I noted at the outset that since the global financial crisis, concerns around inequality have intensified. Yet measures of income inequality during that time have not risen. Sorry, I'll just get this right. So when looking at inequality, the most common measure, and I'll get technical very briefly here and then move on, but the most commonly cited measure is the Gini coefficient, and it ranges from 0 to 1, and the higher it is, the more inequality that you have. Now what you can see on this chart is based on ABS data. It fluctuated in Australia since the global financial crisis, but it hasn't really increased. But I would note that it did increase in the decade from the mid-90s. Now, the magnitudes might be different, but the general trends for wealth and consumption inequality are broadly similar. So an interesting way to go and look behind this is to actually look at how the distribution of incomes have changed. So in this chart, the purple line represents the distribution of income in 95-96, and the grey line shows the distribution of income 10 years later. Now, during this time, you can see that the proportion of households on lower incomes decreased and the proportion on much higher incomes increased. This was a period of healthy income growth for most households, but particularly so for higher income households. The highest income quintile grew 45% compared to 33% at the lowest income quintile. So then when we look at after the global financial crisis and the 8 years after that, we see the distribution of household income didn't really change that much. But during this period, income growth has stalled. Average weekly household incomes grew by just $27 to $1,009 per week during that period. Now, those who are concerned that Australia is becoming a less egalitarian society may be surprised that the picture that I've painted here is not worse. But I think we need to be mindful of a number of other important factors. Firstly, I think it's natural to question the distribution of economic growth at a time when wages growth is sluggish and income growth is stagnant. There is also clear evidence that the income share of the top 1% of income earners is higher than it has been for some decades. And despite Australia's unbroken run of economic growth, we still have 13% of our population living beneath the poverty line. And of course, there's different ways to assess and present information on inequality, which adds to the complexity. Just consider a few selected headlines from a Google search on the topic of inequality in Australia. The first, the ABS is wrong, inequality is getting worse. The second, the real story on inequality, an article which begins, lies, damn lies, and inequality statistics. Finally, 4 things you need to know about inequality. Number 1, income inequality is low and decreasing in Australia. So to help increase clarity in the future, CEDA recommends in our report to add another authoritative voice to the debate. We're calling for the Productivity Commission to undertake 5-yearly reviews into inequality. Now, this would be to look at overall levels of inequality, but also to drill into some of the key areas where we think more needs to be done. There have also been suggestions that class is taking greater hold in Australian society. And that's to say that where you live, where you work, where you go to school, and the education of your parents has a significant impact on your future prospects. Now, the Minister will shortly be talking about education, but a few high-level findings on another of these issues, the role of location on inequality. In our report, Patricia Faulkner outlines compelling evidence of the concentration of geographic disadvantage. In Queensland, 6% of statistical local areas account for almost 50% of the greatest disadvantage in the state for indicators like long-term unemployment, prison admissions, low family income, and disengaged young adults. Other states and territories have similar results. Now, the persistence of this kind of geographical disadvantage is deeply concerning. CEDA's report endorses place-based initiatives, collaboration across sectors, better integration of services and initiatives, greater transparency around spending and impact, better access to and use of data on disadvantaged populations. In addition, based on the facts around absolute poverty and the adverse cycle of geography of disadvantage, CEDA also adds its voice to the chorus of those calling for a lift in New Start payments to a more adequate level. The topic of intergenerational equality has also attracted attention and comment, really driven by concerns around future jobs and trends in intergenerational wealth, including property assets. Professor Peter Whiteford's analysis in our report suggests the full picture is mixed at this point. First, he highlights findings from the Luxembourg income study that show that the incomes of young Australians rose faster than older households between 1985 and 2010. And as you can see on this chart, Australia was the only country among the 8 advanced economies analysed where this was the case. And Professor Whiteford's own analysis of the ABS data reinforces this finding. However, it's a different story when it comes to wealth. In the last decade, the wealth of older age groups has increased more rapidly. This has been driven by increasing superannuation wealth as retirement approaches and increasing property wealth. Younger households have seen declining home ownership and higher overall indebtedness. We've drawn attention again to CEDA's recommendations from late last year for governments to address the affordability of housing for younger Australians. Intergenerational inequality is clearly an area we need to continue monitoring closely as new data provides a clearer picture. There's also little doubt that technology is reshaping our world with dramatic implications, including less certainty about future careers and opportunities. One area that CEDA's report sought to consider was the nature of work and the potential implications for lifetime inequality. I'm referring specifically to the impact of the gig economy and a future where it seems increasingly likely that individuals will derive income from several channels and platforms over a lifetime. The exponential growth of the gig economy is currently subject to considerable debate. Some estimates suggest that contingent workers make up 1% of the workforce, and this is growing rapidly. These workers fall outside common employment arrangements like superannuation. Given the potential for future economic security and retirement income gaps, we've recommended that the government explore the adequacy of superannuation, pension and savings products for contingent workers. Finally, I've already highlighted several ways in which vulnerability and disadvantage can trigger a cycle of lifetime vulnerability. We need to carefully reflect on the role that technology might play in this context, and specifically how data and technology might inadvertently reinforce vulnerability and disadvantage. If we don't prepare fast enough to manage emerging risks around technology, it could compound issues for those already disadvantaged. For this reason, we're recommending that Australian governments and businesses should develop and adopt ethical principles and guidelines for the use of AI, data mining and autonomous systems. These should align with internationally accepted principles that are emerging. Australia should also support emerging market mechanisms for peer review and independent scrutiny of algorithmic models. So the issues I've covered today present just a slice of the report, but they really go to the heart of how we choose as a society to translate continuing economic growth into improved living standards across a range of dimensions. This will be a strong and continuing focus of CEDA this year and in the years ahead. Our future research agenda will focus on those areas that could make the greatest difference to Australia's economic development and the prosperity of Australians. In the middle of the year, we will release research that we've been conducting on community attitudes to economic growth and development. This research will be the start of a nationwide discussion on economic growth and development that CEDA is undertaking. It will culminate in a major research report at the end of the year on the purpose of economic growth and development. So for now, I urge you to read our, I think, chunky report, as Kyle referred to it as, and thank you for your attention.